to Purpose Driven Progress. Today, we're going to be answering the question, do you need to know all the answers in order to be an effective leader? Let's dive right in. First, I want to ask you guys a question. Have you ever had a bad fit job? And I don't mean just a job where, there's some things you don't like, but the money's okay, blah, 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 blah. But I mean like truly a bad fit job, a job where you get into it and you're just like, oh my gosh, I have made a mistake. This is awful. What am I doing? A really bad fit job. If you've been following along with me at all, so you know for a fact that I have experienced a couple of bad fit jobs in my life, but it's been okay because that's really given me the lessons to get here where I'm speaking with you today. Said I was actually working one of those bad fit jobs before I went full time into coaching and speaking like I am today. And it was a sales job and it was an outside sales job. And that means that I was traveling a lot. And I don't mean just like around town or around, my town or anything like that, but I'm talking about 3 to 5,000 miles a month. So I remember there was one week in my cycle, we called it, where every time I would see folks in a certain cycle, certain cadence. And I remember counting one time, and one of the weeks I was spending 20 hours, 20, in the car, not including appointments and calls and getting to the hotel and doing emails and everything else, 20 hours in the car. And it was exhausting. Now, usually I did my best to try to keep my car clean. So I was part of one of those car washes where you had a subscription. So you paid a monthly and you could go as often as you liked. And it was great because I was spending so much time on the road that my car was always caked in dust. But towards the end of my time, and things were really starting to heat up for me a little bit, where I was just realizing this is just not where I'm supposed to be. I really wasn't keeping my car clean. The outside was, it was okay. I tried to get car washed every week or so, but the inside, I always joked that I was living out of my car at the time. Because in a way I kind of was. Not truly, but I was spending a lot of time in the car. But I tried to keep it clean, but at the time, because things were getting so rough and so bad, I wasn't keeping it clean at all. There were fast food wrappers and office supplies just kind of strewn about, and I've got a sweet tooth, so there were some candy wrappers just kind of strewn about all over the floor. And I don't know about you guys, but I was getting that feeling where, how like it's not like your house is just like untidy, but it's like really unclean, just unkept. And it feels almost like, to me, it feels like you're disrespecting yourself a little bit. And that's kind of how I felt. Like every time I got in my car, I just like, oh, this again. And it's just so dirty and so filthy. And I had super tight shoulders, kind of just all the time, partly from driving in the car all the time, just kind of sitting in the car all day long, and then having my hands at 10 or 2 or 12, which is kind of how I typically drive. And my shoulders get really, really tight, but then like the stress would get to me too. And I just kind of always had these super nasty knots in my shoulders, and I would try to work them out on my own. I would try to stretch out, but it didn't really get where I wanted to go. And then one day while I was working this job and traveling, all over Timbuktu, something that came down from corporate, from the higher ups. And honestly, it really rubbed me the wrong way, just because I didn't feel like it aligned with my personal values. Like I didn't think it was not that it was like a bad policy. I just didn't think it was a good way to treat people, employees and customers alike. And I was just kind of fed up by that point. Maybe you guys have been there. And I talked to a few of my friends. I talked to some colleagues that I trusted, and I decided that enough was enough. Like this just wasn't working for me anymore. So I remember this vividly. Said it was early on a Wednesday morning. I called my boss to tell him that I had decided to leave. And I kind of expected, I guess I don't know what I expected, but I thought there was going to be some sort of conversation where it's like, oh, okay, well, can you tell me a little more about what's going on, or like, how are you feeling, or, this kind of thing. And instead of that, all I heard was silence. It was just perfectly quiet. And I realized that his silence from this revelation that, hey, I feel like things are going so poorly that I can no longer sustain what you're offering me. I felt like that silence was a ringing endorsement for what I decided. That not only were, things difficult anyway, his policy came down, I didn't agree with it. And not only did my boss not have anything to say about it, he just didn't seem to make a difference when I decided to leave. And I was one of the top performers in the company. So I mean, it just kind of tells you where that company was at the time. But after I got off the phone with him, because it took all of 2 minutes to say, "Hey, I'm leaving," and he's like, well, "Okay," and that was it. After I got off the phone, I decided I wanted to have a little bit of a win. I decided that this was the next step in my life. I was going to start my full-time coaching and speaking, and I was excited about that. But I needed to take a minute to reflect and kind of celebrate where I was at. So I decided to make kebabs for dinner. That I would treat myself a little bit. So I made kebabs, had all my favorite stuff on there. So I had cherry tomatoes, marinated chicken, kielbasa, big fan of kielbasa, mushrooms, bell peppers, pineapple too, because I'm a little bit quirky that way. And I just remember kind of just chilling in my living room while it was cooking. And it smelled incredible, right? It smelled really, really good. And it felt like I was just where I was supposed to be. And then when I was finally done cooking, I was eating it, and it was obviously tasted incredible. And it felt like I was finally coming home. It finally felt like I was ready to be done. And this kind of brings us to our initial question: is do you need to have all the answers to be an effective leader? Now I'm going to give you a hint. It's kind of a big hint, but the answer is no. Let me give you that hint again. The answer is no. You don't have to have everything figured out in order to be a good leader. What a good leader does is they ask insightful questions, meaning that they don't just assume that they know the answers, and they keep asking those questions to the effect that, this has always kind of been a sticking point for me where, every year as an employee, we are given performance reviews, right? So you're just like, hey, on 1 to 5, 1 to 10, A to B, kind of whatever their format is, they determine how good a job you are doing at your job. And then a lot of times that can affect, your year-end bonuses or raises, or, it'll affect you somehow. But I've realized that I feel like we need to have those, because that's important to make sure we are improving as employees. But we never stop to see how the employer is improving. And I think a big reason for that, particularly in the sales world, is that we lose sight of our why. I've said in other podcasts that, sometimes salespeople can get a bad rap that we're only focused on money and blah, blah, blah. And that's just not the case a lot of the time. And particularly when we're talking about not only like your sales performance, but also just your life in general, like what is really driving you? Like why get into a sales role if that's what you're in, and pursue generating bigger and better revenue? Like why do that? Because it's hard work a lot of the time where you're taking your time away from your family. So, is it just to have money? Is it to have the biggest house and the nicest car? Is it to provide an incredible life for your family and your kids? And I think as employers, a lot of times it can really be easy to lose sight of those things, not necessarily like in their personal lives, but for their employees. It's like, John Smith, for example, like some guy comes right out of college, and he's, young and hungry, doesn't have a family yet. So he wants to go out and grind for 70, 80 hours. Nothing wrong with that. And understanding why he's doing that is really important, particularly if he sticks with a company for a while, and then maybe he does end up getting married and settling down and having a couple of kids. And maybe his why has changed. And as employers, it's really easy to just assume that he's going to keep doing that 70, 80-hour work week thing, when really all he wants to be doing is working a flat 40 and coming home and spending time with his kids and going to all the baseball games and all the soccer games. I think that's really, really critical to make sure that we're asking those really open-ended, insightful questions on a consistent basis. The other thing that good leaders will do is empower others to think critically, meaning that if I'm leading your team and we have an issue or a project that we're dealing with, and I just come and say, hey, here's how we're going to do it. I mean, how much empowerment do you really feel as an employee? Like, sure, I might trust you to get your job done, but you're like, well, I guess I just have to do it this way, regardless of what I think. So coming in as a leader and saying, hey, here's the issue. We have to figure out some way to fix this or get around it or complete this project. What do you all think we could do to get that done? What's the best way to get that done? The other thing they do is create space for collaboration and learning, meaning that if I'm your leader and you don't do things to my standard or my specification, instead of coming down hard on you, coming from curiosity, again, not letting my emotions run rampant with me, and let you kind of lead the conversation, saying like, hey, what happened here? Can you just help me understand like where you're coming from, what your thinking process was? Coming from curiosity is arguably one of my favorite strategies, just kind of in general, because it can be really, really effective as a leader to come from curiosity. It can also be really, really effective to come from curiosity as a salesperson. It can also be really, really effective to come from curiosity if you are in an argument or somebody says or done something that upsets you. Trying to understand where they're coming from by asking those open-ended questions, letting your feelings honestly, of course, but coming from that curiosity to really try to understand where things kind of deviated to where they should have been. Some of my favorite open-ended questions is like, what do you think we should do here? Kind of leave it in their court. What do you think that we should do here? Clarifying too. Can you walk me through your thought process? Can we understand what you were doing, where you were coming from, and why you decided to do things this way? And then forward thinking. Say, what would success look like this in this situation? So what would it look like in this situation? What's the best outcome? And how are we going to get there? And really kind of having those honest conversations and be willing to be just a little bit vulnerable I think it's absolutely, absolutely important. So getting back to my story here, after I went full time in coaching, I wanted to give some free offerings to the folks that were stopping by my website, because I'm all about elevating those. Even if somebody doesn't work with me one-on-one or in a group setting or whatever, I still, if you interact with me online or in any real capacity, I want you to leave feeling a little more empowered, a little more positive. So one of the free resources I wanted to offer was some resources around habit building, because I feel like habits kind of do one of two things. They either elevate us up or drag us back down, just kind of depending on how good and healthy that particular habit might be. And it can be hard to break some of our harder bad habits. And it can be hard to replace those bad habits with really good quality habits that will get us to where we want to go at the end of the world. Now, I know I wanted to offer this habit thing. I had no real idea how to start. Now, I can write, a handful of emails and stuff, but I wanted to be just as seamless as it possibly could. So if somebody came in, they could get this resource, they could get these emails, and they could go on their way. So I wanted that to get done. And I remember just sitting at my desk, kind of my fingers kind of hovering over the keyboard. I remember feeling those little ridges on the F and J keys on your keyboard. I remember just kind of feeling those just over and over again, just kind of feeling like I don't even know really where to start. So I started to do some Googling. Shocker, right? Did some Googling, started looking through a ton of websites to try to figure out, like, how do I make my website do this thing and offer this free resource to people? And I remember trying to work around the back end of my website to make these pages function the way I wanted. Different modules weren't working. And my desk was just an absolute mess. So I remember I hate to say it, I had snacks kind of strewn all over the place. I had 4 or 5 papers just kind of sitting on the corner. I had a bunch of just random sticky notes just all over the place. And I'm sure you guys have never been in that position, but again, maybe you've known some folks that have been in that kind of situation before. And the screen was shining in my face. And I started working so long that I started to lose focus. And when I'm getting to that point, and even earlier on, I like to listen to piano music when I'm working, just because if there's music with any kind of lyrics to it, I have a really hard time not focusing on the lyric and keeping my mind on what I'm supposed to be doing. So listening to just piano music, because I play a little bit, and that's just what I like. And I was getting to the point where I was listening to this music for so long that I was starting to get the same songs over and over again. And I remember, because it was around the holidays, I had a candle burning in the room, and it smelled like cinnamon. Because for me, cinnamon, like that just screams like holidays, like Christmas time. That's just one of my favorite smells in the world. So I said, I really just didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. So I decided to take a break. It was a short break and come back to it later. So I took a break, had a sip of water. And honestly, it tasted really, really great in the moment. And I came back to it. And finally, after all of this struggle and headache and frustration at just do the thing that I wanted to do, I finally found a website that had a few answers. And I really don't understand. Like, I'm not a website designer. I don't get coding and all that stuff. Like, that's not my thing. I'm a coach. Like, that's my lane. I try to stay in it as much as I can. But I found this website that had a few of the answers to kind of like get me to that next step to where I wanted it to go. And I reached out to a buddy of mine who I didn't realize before this was actually reasonably well versed in website design and how to just get things done like that, like what I was looking for with this habit thing. And he said, "Hey, you need to do, this, and this." It's like, oh, okay. Well, so I tried that and I got it done. I mean, it took me, well, I'm not going to tell you how long it took me, but it took me a large part of several days to get this one thing done that I felt would be helpful to people. But I finally got it all done, got it all tied together. And actually it's still available on my website if you guys are looking to, have some habit work done. But I felt so much relief. And even though this wasn't like, I scored a huge big client or something like that, I mean, it was still an accomplishment, because I mean, I came in knowing nothing and was able to get this thing done and set up the way that I wanted. So as a small reward, I decided to give myself the evening off. Again, that may not sound like a huge thing to you, but for me, so I love being able to just like chill on my couch, watch a show or a movie, and just relax, not worry about anything. So thank you all so much for listening. So if you're a solopreneur or someone still driving towards their dreams, keep going. You can do it. Keep going. I believe that grit, or to put it another way, just the willingness to continue despite adversity and struggle and obstacles, will define our ability to be successful, kind of period. So continue. You can do this. Come from curiosity. Lead even if you're only leading yourself. You can do this. And remember to subscribe to PDP, Purpose Driven Progress, and I will see you guys next time.